Creativeness. Creative torrents seek out the mind of the man who lives in God's grace, surge through his being, leaving a kind of thought world laid down in space. Gift of God. The only true experience is the act of creation. All usual action and thought are not truly action or thought at all, but only reaction to the stimuli of nature. People go through their lives as sleepwalkers, responding to things about them as automatons, never opening their beings to the imagery and force of the divine so that new things can be called into existence through their own consciousness. The process of creation involves juxtaposition of finite mind with universal mind, so that the former pours into the latter as a lake might pour into a river. Proper relationship between universal being and finite being makes the individual a vehicle for the expression of the divine. People sometimes are born this way, grow into renown as possessors of great talent. Writers, painters, sculptors, musicians. Others, by dint of enlightenment, achieve this spiritual elevation and reveal to aspiring humanity some new facet of the divine's nature. This creativity all of us can learn. Through learning it, we fulfill ourselves and our spiritual growth is made complete. The movement of the divine is restless, full of surging force and barely contained energy. Always he seeks outlet, through whatever instrument available, to express some aspect of his infinite nature. For this purpose, each of us is called into being, not to satisfy our sensual natures through pleasure, not to satisfy our egos through possession and victory, but to express in the unfolding drama of humanity that greater idea, that larger concept of the meaning and depth of life. To that end we best fulfill ourselves when we shift the living center of our being from the little self of our transitory nature and seek out the bosom of our originator. Then, by a sort of fusion with him, we express him on the planes of matter and movement. Hitched to a star. We are quiet when the divine uses us for his purposes. Inwardly we are serene, for we have subjugated our sensual nature to his spiritual prompting. Our actions and ideas proceed solely out of an inner attunement to the nature and being of God, and we are without turmoil, without strain and strife. Yet how different is our outer aspect. That which has been admitted into our consciousness is lightning and thunder, energy and force, builder and destroyer. It seizes us in its torrent, kneads and molds us into useful form, works us mercilessly. The man entrapped in divine current is a man possessed. He can no more stop himself from performance than the onrushing river can stop itself short of the sea. The divine is using him to effect on the plane of matter a manifestation of truth, and use him he will to the very end, until his body and brain and ego mask are all used up, and there remains of him nothing but God. It takes courage to open yourself to the forces of nature, to allow the gigantic tides of universal mind to roll and echo through your being. All of life is changed by the spiritual decision to allow God to rule your consciousness. Truly, then, you have hitched your wagon to a star, a shooting star, a speeding comet that by its very momentum will plunge you ever deeper into life so that vistas of pain and pleasure, of subtle meaning, panoramas of infinite design and feeling will open before you, and you will become alive, truly alive, where before you barely existed. It is this faculty of bearing their souls, of fully exposing themselves to the spiritual force of God, that brings to some individuals the talent for creativeness. We know them and recognize them wherever they are. Their presence is an explosion of production, and what they produce is useful, beautiful, the divine expressed and made coherent. All people are born with receptivity to God, from whatever walks of life, of whatever intelligence and education. But this receptivity becomes stultified by over-reliance on material forms, by satisfaction with the world of created things, blindness to see beyond it. We all have the talent of God intrinsically. It will express itself through our natures, in the particular form that our nature gives it, if only we open the doors of our being without reserve and allow the power to flow through. Whatever has been done before we too can do, and even greater things. For when we unite with God, his mantle is ours, and he is without limitation or restriction. We can do anything our consciousness can conceive of and accept. It will be done by the divine, through us. We need only invite him. Creation is God work. Creativeness is never a mark of the individual, but of God instead. It is the divine manifesting through the mask of individual being a particular one of his many aspects. Respect and admiration are accorded those whose talent is great, who create works of beauty and utility that make life more understandable, more comfortable. But it is not they who deserve our admiration, for they are instruments only. The one to whom our homage belongs is God. He creates all things from his own substance. Nobody else is creative but he. Strive and strain, sweat and toil as we may, we never produce one single thing or thought unless he works through us. All creation is God work. The entire task of the individual is to get himself out of the way and let the power of the divine move through him. To the degree that a man resigns himself to God, God makes him a perfect vessel. The work done through a man molds him, tempers him, gives him whatever qualities of the divine are inherent in the task ahead. Thus the individual becomes like his work, the artist like his creation. Carl Jung writes, "The work in process becomes the poet's fate and determines his psychic development. It is not Goethe who creates Faust, but Faust which creates Goethe." Time magazine reports of Pablo Casals, the cellist. It is not possible to watch any part of Casals while he is playing. Not his face, not his hands, not even his cello. It is only possible to watch the whole of him, and this for the simple reason that the parts apparently have no existence independent of the whole. Indeed, Casals himself, while he is playing, seems to have no existence independent of the music. Watching him, it is quite easy to imagine that if the music should stop, he would disappear. The entire process of creation is the relationship between finite mind and universal mind, a kind of plugging in of individual mind into God mind. What results is creative, for something dynamic has been done. A power has been unloosed. It must come out. Something must be produced. The nature of God mind is creation. The nature of individual mind is instrumentation. Each man is creative only as much as he becomes an instrument for the works of the divine. If the ego rules his life, if his consciousness is focused on created things, and he lives in reaction to the outer world rather than by impulsion from the inner, he warps away his divine power and shuts off the flow of his natural creativeness. Psychic position. Arthur wrote a best-selling novel when he was only 24. Critics hailed him as a new discovery, a light that would burn in the literary firmament for many years. He was compared to Conrad, London, Hemingway, Malm, Melville. He seemed likely to develop into the greatest American novelist of all time. He was treated as a lion in literary circles, feted, dined, made obeisance to. Everyone waited for his next book. They were a long time holding their breath. Oh, he made lots of starts. He even finished a manuscript or two, but they were rejected by his publisher as they should have been. By the time he was 30 years old, Arthur still had not published another book. In fact, had not published so much as a short story. People were beginning to say that he was a one-book author. He had burned himself out, they said, by writing a good book so young. Well, Arthur didn't think he was burned out. He knew something was wrong, all right, but he couldn't put his linger on it. He didn't waste any time lamenting it, though. He stayed hard at work, and while he produced nothing worthwhile, he constantly expanded his craftsmanship. Finally, however, discouragement seized him, and he sought advice. "Sometimes it seems as if I'm back on the beam again," he said. "I'll write a page, even several pages, and the words rush out my fingertips so that I hardly can keep pace with them. And I think that now I've found it again, and it will keep on coming. Then, just as suddenly as it came, it leaves, and I sit abandoned in front of the typewriter, each word a labor, each sentence a monstrous effort. Only the page that came easily is there to remind me of what I could do, if only I could get myself into the right psychic position." How did your first book come? Hard or easily? Arthur was asked. Easily. It just flowed out, actually seemed to be the work of someone else. It was. Whose? God's. Arthur thought this over, and then he said that he could see the point, that there was no doubt in his mind that when he was writing well, some greater power had taken over. It interested him that this power might be God. He had thought of it only psychologically, never spiritually. "What can I do to keep this power with me?" he asked. Make a shift in your point of view. Realize that all books are written by one author working through his chosen instruments, that all you have to do in order to ensure that he will work through you is subjugate your will to his. Cease struggling, cease trying to form, simply listen. Be still and wait. You will hear him speak to you. Everything you are to write will flood into your consciousness, impelling you to put it on paper. You will do this without strain, for something else will be using you, doing the work. You will not even be conscious of effort, so great will be the energy that pours through you. "That's it," said Arthur. "You describe it perfectly. But will it stay with me?" "It will stay with you as long as you maintain the proper relationship. Remember that you are not the thinker, the originator, the doer. It is. Simply open yourself to it. Listen, allow it to use you. As soon as you take over the reins, attempt in any manner to do the driving. It will leave as suddenly as it came." Arthur departed with a purpose. During the weeks that followed, he worked at achieving the proper spiritual relationship with his muse. Several times he telephoned to say that he had had it for an hour, even two, but each time he had shut it out by taking over the words and their pattern. One day he called and said, "I've got it." Then he called no more for some time. Next spring, he published a novel. This book was not the sales success of his first, but it was a greater artistic and critical success. From that time on, he became a regular mill of production, publishing a novel every year, dozens of short stories. Arthur tells no one of his secret, however. "It's too personal," he explains. "I feel it is something that concerns only me and God, that somehow I might dissipate its psychic force by talking about it." Creation by means of personal calculation almost never occurs. Amongst artists, only Edgar Allan Poe maintained he could produce or not as he chose, but there is reason to doubt his testimony in this regard. Poe was not wholly himself when much of his work was done, was in fact often withdrawn from his surroundings, an almost perfect description of the semi-trance state in which the subconscious mind takes over entirely. He might easily have felt that this particular state was self-induced, but once in it, it is certain that he had no choice other than to create. Most artists report of their most productive states, a kind of withdrawal from sensory awareness of their surroundings into a world of pure thought and conception. This living in the midst of primary force, this residence in an area of spiritual movement, seems to be the cause of their creative dynamic. Allied with a force above and beyond them, they are led to do as it wishes. It uses them, does their work, so that they, later surveying the result, are inclined to feel that it has been done by another, as indeed it has. It has been done by God. Any calculated effort to create, any contrived manner of authoring a work, shows immediately in the work it has no freshness or originality in its composition, but seems a copy of countless things that have been done before. Contrivance and calculation simply will not produce art or invention, for both are ego efforts, and universal mind does not respond to ego, but flows through the individual only when the ego is out of the way. Calculation is a blockage, actually damming off the power that makes invention possible. The entire effort of the artist or of anyone who seeks to create must be to subjugate ego to universal mind, to seek through surrender that state of heightened awareness, of immensely increased perception and understanding in which he is almost completely absorbed in his creator, and thus is expressing his creator by means of identification. Thus a kind of spontaneous and involuntary production occurs, an automatic functioning which invariably produces works far above the normal powers of the individual, for they proceed out of the mind of God. The untraveled road. People sometimes argue that complete self-surrender borders on lunacy, that absolute giving up of control by conscious mind and resignation to the impulses of the subconscious might easily lead to disastrous conduct on the part of the individual rather than have any noticeable effect on his creative output. But the very opposite is true. When the ego, through notions of inadequacy, through being insisted in emotions such as hate, jealousy, envy, bitterness, retires inward into the subconscious, and grows there like a cancer. It squeezes God out altogether. Control goes, rationality goes, and the individual is swallowed in the maw of impersonality. So insanity comes, so feeble-mindedness. What has occurred is the complete involution of the ego, not its surrender. Far from surrendering, it fights twice as hard, grows twice its size, inside where it cannot be seen. It cuts off completely its ties with God, destroys all power of the individual, leaves him impotent and bereaved of his divinity. Surrender takes courage. Subjugation of the self to the divine is not easy. It represents, to most of us, an awesome departure into the unknown. Inadvertently, we cling to the stuff of the ego, fearful to let go. It requires faith and strength to cut off the ties of our old securities, even though we know them to be inadequate. We have to be bold and determined to walk alone into the vague and vast realms of the spirit. But alone we must go, for what we seek there involves only ourselves and God. If we live totally in response to mandates of the past, to digested and regurgitated opinion, to mores and taboos and standards that are foisted upon us by others, then we do not truly live, but are mere ciphers, statistics. Our reactions are totally predictable, and we are not divine at all, but merely a kind of vulnerable machine. Only when we throw off the ego and begin to create do we begin to fulfill our divinity and individuality. The path is open to all with courage and daring and aspiration. It is not well marked, not even well traveled, but none has set his foot upon it and ever been lost from God. Action versus movement. All psychic life, all contemplation, all spiritual aspiration, far from being conditions of quietude, are conditions of intense activity. Ernest Hemingway is quoted as saying that one must never confuse movement with action, for movement is simply physical transfer through space, while action is the cause of a result. All of us seek action in whatever we do, but all too often we settle for running around, doing this and that, hustling, bustling, never getting anything done. True cause stems from spiritual sources, from a psychic force pent up in the bosom of the individual that impels him to accomplish his aim. This, no doubt, is the reason that Hemingway states that he will not discuss any work in progress. No doubt he has experienced the sad fact that discussion of the work dissipates the psychic energy that is impelling its creation. The artist cloisters himself with his muse. No one is involved but these two. The divine bursts through the instrument of individuality with a manifestation of the meaning of life. Set down on paper, on canvas, in stone, something of the grandeur, significance, and drama of the emerging God is caught by the artist, transferred to his audience. This is a work of art. Each of us is an artist whether or not he paints, sculpts, writes. Each of us can accomplish creative ends in life when he learns to cloister himself with the divine and listen. If we can only achieve a spiritual condition of complete self-surrender, we have taken the largest step possible toward allowing the power and purpose of God to flow creatively through us. Such self-surrender is the sine qua non of all creative effort, and exceedingly difficult to achieve. Life is so vital in all of us. The senses constantly beat at the window panes of our attention. Things are pleasurable, painful, desirable, repugnant, and most of the time, we are making decisions solely in response to sensation. When we attempt to shut out the material world so that we may gain an insight into spiritual things, we find 1,000 distractions. We may make a little immersion, a slight surrender, then something, a little thing perhaps, a slight noise, an unfamiliar odor, recalls us immediately, and we have gained nothing, only a sense of futility, and the divine whom we seek is farther away than ever. Concentration. Concentration is the mental tool we can use to implement our self-surrender. It is an axiomatic spiritual truth that whatever we set our mind on tends to enter into the deeper realms of our consciousness, and from there, by divine impetus, gradually to make its appearance in the physical world. If we undertake to do things by willing them to happen or in any manner girding the forces of our individual ego, we then oppose ourselves to self-surrender and make it impossible for the full force of the Supreme to work through our nature. Only when we concentrate our entire purpose and total will on the divine is it possible for us to know the full meaning of universal being. Only when all things are shut out of consciousness, but the longing of the heart to know its maker, can the sweetness of self-surrender encompass one with its warmth and energy. We reach deeper, ever deeper, through layer after layer of consciousness, through planes of perception and meaning, all the time expanding the nature of our awareness, until at last that fathomless point is reached, where we fuse our being with the being of the divine. All that we are, have been, can ever hope to be is focused on this point. We have entered into a state of such concentration, such absorption, that to the outer world we appear to be in a trance. We can be spoken to and not hear, we can be touched and not feel. In some deeply mysterious way, we have withdrawn from the body while still remaining in the body, could, if we desired to, perceive ourselves as we would perceive another. We are detached from all sensation, are involved in, and have become one with the thoughts and images that cross our mind. We dwell for the moment in a world of pure spirit, of psychic forces and meanings, and here we would as soon dwell forever. Such is its bliss, its joy, its freedom and serenity. Such is the magic state of divine fusion entered into by the individual when he is used as an instrument of creativeness by the Supreme. Such is the cleansing and purifying action used by the divine to properly temper and adjust his agents of manifestation. Every artist knows this state as the one in which his work flows effortlessly. Every thinker, creator, builder has experienced it as a field of increased vision, of magnified awareness. It is not something that just happens to people because of some peculiar functioning of their glands, or because of some strange environmental condition. It is the soul's response to its creator, its longing for return to a state of unity, of primary oneness. It is a report of the joys and the significance of that state, and it invariably manifests through one whose mental and spiritual powers have been consciously or subconsciously turned over to something spiritually greater than himself. Patience. Of all the virtues most difficult to apprehend by one who seeks divine union and creativeness through that union, patience stands alone. She often seems to desert us completely, leaving us ravaged by restlessness and dissatisfaction that gnaw at our very souls. Once having tasted of the union that now is the hourly quest of everything we are and do, we cannot tolerate the unspeakable impotence and solitude that we experience without it. We want it with us every minute, literally demand that it be with us every minute, and the blockage afforded by the exertion of our will isolates us from it, and we are enraged, bitter, desolate, that we cannot find that which has become so dear. Creativeness is gone, inner joy and peace have fled, and our impatience keeps them from returning. Oh, impatience is a common thing amongst those who experience the spiritual act of creation. Nearly all mental and spiritual activity transpires beneath the level of consciousness, and when we are not moved to perform, to act, to plan, to make decisions, we feel that nothing is being done. Something always is being done. The nature of our existence is that we are spiritual beings, and our physical bodies are but the smallest representation of what we really are. Like the iceberg, far more of ourself is hidden from view than is exposed to the world. And what transpires in this hidden part of our nature is the real work, the meaningful action upon which all the circumstances and things of our life depend. When we expect everything to happen in the area of our consciousness, we cannot help but be impatient, for what is absent from consciousness appears not to exist, and so we fail to perceive the intense action that is going on in deeper planes of our nature. When we are quiet, with the serene quiescence that is the mark of spiritual perception, it is then that we are most truly active. When we have thoroughly learned this remarkable lesson, impatience will trouble us no longer. We may have a flash of insight, even a look into the original center of things. An idea for some work may strike us full bloom, and for the moment we are caught up, impelled by a power beyond us to get at this thing we have seen, to manifest it in the physical world. Then, perhaps when we are half through or even barely started, the inspiration deserts us, and we are abandoned on a bleak and lonely vista, without resources, without energy, without the vision to proceed. We stamp our feet and shake our fists at the heavens, but no amount of vituperation returns us to our inspired state. We can only resign ourselves to this state of apparent inactivity, accept it as evidence that something vital is happening in deeper regions of our being, for one of the laws of our divided nature is that when the surface is active, it is quiet in the depths, and when the surface is quiet, the depths are active. Knowing this, we are able to accept the cycles of work and rest that are our lot in life, using each for its true and best purpose, discontent with neither, discovering the inherent joys of each. And eventually we come to realize that our greatest satisfaction lies in that time of quietness, that point of rest on the spiritual journey where nothing is apparently being done, but wherein we find a spiritual closeness, a tie with the divine that stems directly from our complete reliance on Him to move us when and as He will. Divine tempering. All great ideas, all strong motivations well up instantaneously from the depths, impel the accomplishment of some work, and seem to the onlooker to be perfectly spontaneous. Actually, they are the result of lengthy and arduous subconscious thought on the part of the individual. That which he gestates as a whole and complete thing was a long time in conception. It is the result of everything he has ever learned, done, aspired to do, of the particular relationship he has developed with the divine, of the work that the divine has laid down for his spiritual maturation. Insight into the nature of things and inspiration as to their development are never the result of the isolated individual thinking out improvements on nature, but rather of the divine manifesting through the individual his progressive unfolding. Therefore, the process of creation depends entirely on the individual's complete surrender of himself to God. Only in this manner can he become a vehicle for the works of the divine in the world. Any ego-centering makes him an amoeba, the smallest of the small, and nothing works through him. Nothing carries him forward. He lives out his life in prison bars of his own making. Surrender to God, concentrate on His purpose, listen to His instruction, act accordingly. These are the commandments of creation. Who follows them is led inexorably to creating new and exciting works. He will not necessarily do this effortlessly, but he will be impelled by a power greater than himself to overcome all suffering and pain, all obstacles encountered. Nature shows us that new life is born into existence through pain, and we must face the great creative fact that all new ideas, all inspiration are similarly brought forth. The divine tempers His instruments by subjecting them to stress and strain, and when the metal is proven to His satisfaction, He uses the vessel for the performance of His deeds in the world. But if the metal prove faulty, if it is left cringing and defeated in the wake of pain and effort, He casts it aside without concern, for it is only himself after all, an unfit conception, and one he has no further use for. What we are led to perform, to bring forth when we are allied with the creative power of the divine is inevitably beautiful, for it contains a glimpse of Him who supports our being, hints of a magnificence and grandeur we long to know. Spiritual truth underlies all works of art, and it is this truth, even though obscured, even though barely hinted at, that makes them beautiful. Artistic vision. Beauty was an elusive ideal for Robert. He was a painter, and he had destroyed far more of his canvases than he had kept. He would sell none. "They're not good enough," he said. "They're junk. I keep them around only to remind me how far I missed." "Missed what?" he was asked. "The vision," he said. "The picture that was in my mind." One of his canvases was a pastoral scene, a country road with eucalyptus trees lining either side, shading the road with their intertwined branches. In the distance a patch of sunlight shone where the road emerged from shadow. Light and shade were exquisite. "Isn't this an actual scene?" Robert was asked. He frowned. "An actual scene inspired it," he said. "But is a painter a photographer? If what he sees is worth anything, it is in the way he sees it. This is no good because I failed to paint it the way I saw it." "How did you see it then?" "Like a cathedral. It seemed like a psalm of God." There was no mistaking the fact that he had caught something of this feeling in the painting, but a hint only, a kind of subtle emanation. "I think you managed to convey your feeling. The picture has a spiritual quality. To you, perhaps, not to me. All I see is a parody of the perfection that filled my mind. When my hand moved with the brushes, this was the result, a caricature, a burlesque. It mocks me, fills me with impotence, haunts my dreams. Nothing is one-sided, Robert." "What do you mean by that?" "Life is a great duality. the physical and the spiritual. The spiritual is the idea, the inherent perfection that lies behind life. The physical is the gradual unfolding of the perfection of spirit. Since it is unfolding, it never quite manages to capture the entire meaning and scope of the entity it attempts to represent. Thus, the physical is always a profanation of the spiritual. Your picture to you is a spiritual thing. You sensed, felt, and perceived it in a spiritual manner. But when you brought it forth into the world, something of its meaning and scope was lost. This is always the relationship of the spiritual and the physical. I cannot reconcile myself to that, Robert said. The pictures that I see and feel inside me must come out. If I cannot give them form, they are a torment and will not let me rest. It is you who give yourself no rest because you refuse to accept God's law of living. Do you think you know more than He? Is He not able to express as He wishes the meaning and significance of life? It is a great conceit to think that such interpretation rests on your shoulders. Let it go. Be content to express as you can the truth of your inner vision. That is very difficult to do, said Robert. Beauty is an exacting mistress. She is not content to rest within, but must come out. I don't believe I can contain her. Don't try to. Let her come out as she will. Just don't strain. Put yourself in the hands of God, of your muse, of beauty. Let yourself be used. Don't try to use that which possesses you. But what of my work? How can I tolerate my work? There are truth and beauty in it. Each will grow as you yourself grow. But the work of any moment will never approach the spiritual vision of that moment. Be content to know that when you paint, you leave something of truth and beauty on the canvas. That is enough for any man. Robert returned to his work with tongue in cheek. He thought that if he failed to be critical of his own work, he couldn't possibly improve. In the months that followed, he turned out an increasing number of excellent canvases, several of which approached greatness. He destroyed none, let all be shown, sold those he could. He seemed happier, less taught, more content with life. One day he said, "I think I understand. Who am I to say which of my works is true, which beautiful? Are my standards important? If a picture is given me to paint and I paint it, is even the work mine? How can I be critical or destroy the work of one who is greater than I? I am content now just to work. I have found peace in the doing itself, not the result." The primary thinker. Original thinking is the basis of all creativeness, but how difficult it is for most of us to achieve. How often we abdicate from thought in favor of reaction. How often we subordinate the mind to that which is told us, taught us, that which we read. We walk around, perform our duties, think of ourselves as being masters of our fate, when all the time we are only a mobile set of reflexes. Any good psychologist can predict exactly how we will behave in any given circumstance. But if we think, we are not predictable, only people who react are predictable, for they act only out of habit and thus prevent themselves from rising above circumstance. Original thinking proceeds out of a man's wiping the slate of the past clean, so that he neither is a product of it, nor can it influence him in any way. Original thinking is made possible through a man's letting go of conceit, of ego-centeredness, of any conception or ideal that keeps his performance bound to limits in himself. Only by letting go of experience, only by letting go of self, is it possible for the individual soul to think in terms large enough to be an improvement upon that which has been thought before. You cannot become an instrument of the Lord when you cling to little islands of refuge, when you refuse to let go of beliefs and inhibitions and false ideals simply because what will replace them is unknown. You must throw off all bounds, all limitations, all restrictions, all finalities, if you seek to be joined to the divine. For when you become His instrument, you must be open to all possibilities, all probabilities, however remote, however fantastic. Only by opening yourself to the manifold possibilities of God is it possible to know Him in your own nature and to manifest His power and goodness in life. It always has been generally believed that talent is something a person is born with. He either has it or he doesn't. If not, it is just too bad. That just isn't the case. It is true that the inherent relationship of the individual with the divine is more apparent in some people than others. Some appear to be more gifted through showing a greater aptitude for painting, music, writing, or other forms of creative activity. But the divine does not tie some of us closer to him than others. He supports each person with his entire being. Therefore, when a man appears to have no creative talent, it is because some facet of his own nature is blocking out his spiritual existence. Some denial in his mental and sensory makeup is keeping divine power from manifesting through him. This blocking out of his spiritual existence, this denial in his earthly nature can be overcome through mental and spiritual treatment, so that in the end he will undergo a great awakening of his underlying spiritual being, so that powers and abilities will stir and make themselves known in such a manner as he had never dreamed. The infinite artist. All paintings are painted by one painter. All books are written by one author. All music composed by one composer. All buildings designed by one architect. All invention created by one inventor. He is Rembrandt, Tolstoy, Brahms, Wright, and Edison, and he is in each of us, neither more nor less than in them. He will work through your nature to produce invention, if only you school your sensual self to take a back seat in the direction of your affairs and turn over your thoughts and desires and life to him. The very essence and nature of the divine is creativity. Wherever he is, there the evidence of his presence is productivity. From the inexhaustible fount of his infinite and manifold nature springs ceaseless formation and invention. The life of a man who opens his soul to the power of God is a life lived on a bolt of lightning. He is used by the dynamic power that runs and sustains the universe, and his life takes on the potency of that power. All artistic sensibility has universal meaning underlying it, a communication, as it were, from the soul of the artist to the soul of his audience, in which the two mingle and become one. So it is that the hearing of an extraordinary piece of music, the viewing of a great painting inspire in us the same reverential awe, as do countless sharp stars on a clear night, the limitless expanse of the ocean, the rugged gorge of the Grand Canyon. By contemplating the works of nature, we gain insight into the vast and almost incomprehensible being of God. It is the artist who captures this universal feeling, this glimpse of the infinite, molding it into form while retaining the meaning. All creation is a message from God, captured on canvas or paper, in brick or steel or clay, wrought at the behest of the divine as a sort of rainbow to the soul, tokening his promise of immortality to each of us. The painter, the poet, the musician, the sculptor, the writer, each walks in nature, filling his heart with her sighing sound, the silent noise of her germinating fecundity, her immense and universal propensity for eternal growth. So there comes to him a storing up of creative power, a kind of charging of the batteries of the soul, which eventually results in the bursting through of a new idea, a new interpretation, a new perspective. The works of nature hold for the aspiring creator hidden truths, esoteric meanings that can only be divined through moving among them and probing at the secrets of their grandeur. The sea speaks to the man, and the man writes Moby Dick. The wilderness speaks, and he writes the Deerslayer. Nature stirs the imagination, inspires the heart, charges the energies. Her silent testimony exists as a monument to God's intimate relationship with all created things. Creative imagery grows out of the soul's relationship to the divine. It may be visual and resolve itself into pictures within the consciousness. It may be auditory and resolve itself into voices speaking within. It may even be entirely automatic, possessing the individual so completely that he acts at the behest of something beyond his own volition. Without doubt, the great identifying mark of the artist is the welling up from subterranean layers of consciousness of a power that possesses him and uses him, and which is greater at all times than he. This basic spiritual relationship, however, sometimes is not understood by the artist himself, and he flies from his muse in order to regain the sanctuary of his egoistic nature, thinking that it is weak and immature not to be exercising his own will, but always to be acceding to something inside him. When he recognizes that the cessation of his own will is the spiritual culmination of all that is significant in life, then he becomes a truly great artist. Then he ceases to act in the restricted sensual sphere of his own nature and expands his consciousness into the universality of God. Then he can truly communicate, truly see. The artist incarnate. Creativity, then, is not a thing in itself, or even something that is restricted to certain men. It is simply the overt manifestation of the soul's union with God, a sure sign that the ego is not the director of the actions or the ideas, but the divine instead, for it is the mark of God and never of man when works of progress and power, new and revealing, make their way into the world. In some men, this subordination of the ego to the divine is an unconscious thing. It is a relationship developed so early in life that they are unaware of any struggle, of having made any decision, but are led always from within. These are men with intense dedication, immense preoccupation. They spend their lives listening to inner voices, watching the play of imagery in the mind. They appear to have gigantic powers of concentration, so effectively do they blot out the stimuli of the world. Actually, they are not focused there at all, but within. And it is this shift in valence from normal centering in the material world to a centering in a world of mind that gives rise to our geniuses, our Mozarts, Shakespeare's, Michelangelo's, Jesus Christ's. Talent is not possessed by the individual at birth, but is only the power and glory of the divine shining through. When insisting layers of ego and isolation are removed from the spirit, then it penetrates the mask with expressions of its true purpose and ultimate meaning. These expressions resolve themselves into creative effects, give the impression of being the result of a talent possessed by the individual, when in truth he possesses it not at all, but is possessed by it, for it comes from beyond him and is greater than he. The same talent exhibited by our geniuses lies dormant in every one of us. All we have to do is abdicate from the presidency of the partnership that exists between ourself and God. As long as the ego is in control, our affairs are being conducted by the junior partner, and our lives are frustrated through being encompassed by narrow horizons. But once we step down and let the senior partner take over, we awaken to new powers and an immensely increased scope of awareness. Each of us is the artist incarnate. Each of us, by finding his true relationship with his Creator, inevitably must manifest in the world of created things those expressions of the Master Spirit that are an inspiration to all. Thus, great bridges and buildings are built, first rockets probe into space, epics of literature and masterpieces of art come to us. The soul of the artist is the soul of God. It is He in all creators who does the actual creating. Artists are only instruments, can only be artists through being instruments, and no man can be creative in life without first surrendering himself to the divine, giving himself over completely to be used as God sees fit. Inspiration seldom comes to the listener in the form of thunder and lightning. More often it is a small voice speaking in the depths of the soul. But it moves him with a force and purpose he never has known before. No matter the quietude in which such inspiration comes, it comes as irresistible truth, as the manifested Word of God. Heeding it, following it, working to effect its ends, becomes the primary purpose and the sole motivating force of the enlightened man. So it is that everything he creates bears the imprint of the emerging Godhead, touching the soft core of emotion and feeling in all who behold it. For what it symbolizes above all else is the spiritual unity of all beings and their umbilical tie with the divine. The glory of this conception, regardless of how vaguely hinted at, is what makes art art, creation creation. Without it, all artistic endeavor is a child's scribbling. The searching soul. Harriet had fine perceptual sensibility, a deft touch with her hands, an inherent understanding of line, light and shadow, perspective. She worked well in watercolors and oils, was even an exceptional draftsman. She went several years to art school, then decided on a career as a dress designer. She apprenticed herself to one of the leading commercial houses and spent several years under tutelage. When finally she asked for greater responsibility, however, she was denied. She insisted upon a reason and was told that she had no creative sense, that she must be content to do the artwork on other people's ideas. Designing work of her own was out of the question. She was deeply upset. She quit her job at once, determined to find another. But jobs in the dress designing business were difficult to come by, especially when her previous employer was not inclined to recommend her, and Harriet found only closed doors. Finally, she took a job as a sales clerk in a department store. Now she was convinced that her previous employer had been right, that she had no talent. Her goals seemed destroyed, and she existed from day to day. She began to drink heavily, sought gaiety in the party life of the big city. Harriet was an exceptionally attractive young woman, and she had no difficulty finding escorts. In attempting surcease from the ache of her disappointment, she carried on several love affairs during the ensuing year. One day she found herself pregnant. The hopelessness that had been creeping up on her now engulfed her completely. She decided to take her own life. She took a large overdose of sleeping pills and was discovered unconscious when the maid came to her apartment in the morning. Harriet was taken at once to the hospital, where she hovered on the brink of death for 24 hours. Gradually, she began to recover. Friends sought help for her. She was taken to a religious counselor. "I don't want to live," she said. "I'm tired. Things haven't worked out right. I'm ready to go." "How old are you, Harriet?" she was asked. 27. "That seems rather young to die." "Not when there's nothing to live for. There will be the child. Won't that be something?" "I don't want it. I don't even consider it mine." "Perhaps not. But God considers it yours." "I don't believe in God." "That doesn't obliterate him, Harriet. He is there whether you believe in him or not. He runs your life whether you allow him to or not. He is molding you here on earth, tempering you by pain and ordeal, so that you will awaken to your true spiritual birthright. All who attempt to run their lives in accordance with the motives of their own vanity eventually meet desolation. For this is a spiritual law. God sees the soul on the wrong course, and he places obstacles there. Like a river rechanneled, the soul boils and rages, but eventually takes the new course, serener now, quietly proceeding to the sea. Harriet looked interested. "You mean you believe in predestination?" "Not predestination for the things of the flesh, but rather predestination for the things of the spirit. Each soul undergoes its own ordeal, an ordeal designed only to refine and purify its understanding. And this ordeal is only between the soul and God." "Then you believe that what has happened to me had to happen to me?" "Yes. It has been the way chosen by the Master Spirit to awaken you to your true spiritual self. Your suffering is largely over, for even now you are glimpsing that greater self, finding a hint of its meaning." "What am I supposed to do?" "Ask God. Go home and get down on your knees and ask him. He will answer, and in that answer your life will be rejuvenated." "I don't think I can." "A few days ago you tried to take your own life. Is it more difficult to get down on your knees?" She nodded at this, said she would try. When she left, there was a hint of purpose in her bearing that had been missing before. Harriet had her child a boy, and she gave him her own surname. During the months of her confinement, she worked out several sketches for new dress designs, and she was startled at how they turned out. "It's almost as if someone else is doing them," she said. "Someone else is," she was told. Morning and evening she prayed. Tension left her. She grew peaceful and poised, able to work long hours without fatigue. She returned home from the hospital with her child to find that 3 of her sketches had been accepted by a leading dress manufacturer. Today she is one of the most able designers in the industry, successful, secure, married, with 2 more children. One evening in a discussion at her home, she was asked how she managed to successfully combine both home and career. "I let God do it," she said. The unseen light. Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote, "More things are wrought by prayer than this world dreams of. But the kind of prayer that gets results is not the will of the prayer maker exerting itself to effect some material solution to his problem. The kind of prayer that gets results is the prayer for guidance, for illumination, a pledge that completely submits the soul to its Creator, to the will and the working of God. This is the path to heightened powers of creativity. This is the avenue by which every man can awaken within himself the latent artist whose brush paints all pictures. Creativity, then, is a byproduct of spiritual illumination, the mark of a man whose center of consciousness is spiritual and not material. It is an end obtained not so much by devotion to a particular activity, as it is an inner devotion to an unseen light. All efforts of the man who aspires to creativeness must be directed toward the end of achieving unity with God. He must seek within for the power and purpose to expand beyond himself. When at last there comes into his soul a kind of silent joy, a serene bliss, a letting go of all personal problems, then he will know that God is there, sustaining him, guiding him, working through him. His soul will become a shrine then, a place of inner sanctity, a haven of reverential fusion. Here he meets all life, from here all proceeds. He senses this inner center as being both alpha and omega of existence, as being directly connected to the original determinant of things. God's house lies within him. The divine himself dwells there. Now he is aware that all things happen out of an absolute purpose and delicate design, which he not only is able to perceive, but actually seems to direct. Ninth meditation. I search the inner depths of my consciousness for that haven of refuge, where God and I meet and become one. The noises and insistencies of the clamoring world fade away, and I retreat ever deeper, through planes of being and awareness, to a place of utter repose, of absolute bliss, of complete unity, where all barriers are removed between myself and the divine. I lose myself in him, and in that losing I find my greater self. He takes my being and makes it an instrument of his purpose and his power. Through my mind and spirit course the restless, surging energies of God, ever unfolding, dynamically illustrating the manifold sides of his nature. Whatever impinges itself upon my awareness has a delicate and mystic meaning, and I am conscious that nothing is fully developed, finally complete, but that each thing, event, idea, is but a partial revelation of a hidden and magnificent truth. To the emergence of this truth I dedicate myself, for I know that concealed in the heart of each creature is the incarnate God. Through expressing him, I discover myself. To be is to be a part of God, but to grow is to become God. To that growth, to that becoming, I consecrate my life. The apparent duality of my being I surrender as partial truth. I know that my true self is the self of the divine, the one self that pervades the universe, that inhabits every being, that looks out of the eyes of every man. Through allowing this self to work through my nature, I truly become creative. I am instrument of the ultimate artistic sensibility. I know that each soul aspires to union with its Creator, that each seeks for a sign of that union through beauty, knowledge, love. By knowing the divine and loving the divine, I am assured that his power will work through me to illustrate to the world the divinity of man.